Hey, what's going on? It's James with jamesyoungphotography.com, and we're back in Lightroom with another tutorial. And today we're talking all about the tone curve. And that's really good news because if you don't know anything about the tone curve, we're going to break it down completely so that you can make much more informed choices as an artist when you're making your edits. And that's going to make you a much more powerful artist because as you develop a deeper understanding of the tools that you're using, you get more and more tools in your toolbox to create your vision. Now, if you already know everything there is to know about the tone curve, rock and roll. Good on you, you can skip this one. But if you're like me and a lot of us, a quick refresh on the tone curve is not gonna hurt. And just as a reminder, this is going to be the final edit that we're going to take a look at and the tone curve that we're going to play with, but you can always download this raw file for free. All you gotta do is click the link in the description. Now, the first thing you wanna understand about the tone curve is how to read it. And if you watch the tutorial video on the histogram, you actually read the tone curve the same exact way as you read the histogram. So starting from left to right, we start in the black region of our tonal spectrum, or the black area of our exposure. And as we go to the right, we land into our shadows region of our exposure. And then in the middle section here, it's appropriately called the midtones. As we go to the right, we hit our highlight section. And as we go all the way to the right, we hit our whites section. And then just like in the histogram, you can see the same peaks and valleys that are represented on both sides here. So if we have high peaks, that means we have lots of pixels in that particular part of the exposure. So you can see here by reading this tone curve in the exposure that we're looking at here, we have lots of pixels in the darker end of the midtones and into the higher end of the shadows. We have a very, very small amount of pixels in the highlights and a little peak in the top part of the whites. And all of this is reflected in the exposure, where you can see a slice of whites really super bright right here in her hair, and a lot of the background is taking place in shadow area, and lots of her wardrobe is in shadowed area, so on and so forth. Now, once you understand how to read the histogram, now you can start interacting with it with a little bit more intentionality, because the tone curve is super powerful. And if you've ever played with it, you know it's super powerful, because if you're like me, the first time I used the tone curve, I just clicked it and I'm okay, I'm like, this is already out of control. And maybe you click it again and you go, what is going on here? So let's get our bearings here. I'm going to Command Z, undo both of those. And if you're ever like way too in the weeds on something, if you hover over the adjust label right here and double click, that's going to reset your tone curve completely. But to get started, a general rule of thumb is to add what we call a node by clicking right in the middle on the line on the grid in the midtones, and a node in the highlights area, also on the line, and a node in the shadows area, also on the line. And one of the cool things that you can do from here is create what we call an S-curve. So if we click on the node that we created in the shadows and we drag it down just a little bit, you can see that these nodes and this line actually interacts with what we're seeing on the graph. And that's really something else. And you can see it's real touchy. So you just move it a little bit and things really start moving a lot. And contrast starts just moving around a lot. But you can see the only region affected is the region between the nodes as it moves across this spectrum of pixels. Very cool. And the same exact thing will happen on any other node that you create. So now we're in the highlights in the whites area, and you can see it's doing all kinds of crazy things at these extremes. And I'm showing you these extremes so that you know what they're doing in subtle ways, because sometimes it's hard to tell what these subtleties are doing. So I'll Command Z, undo that. And let's start over with the tone curve by double clicking any of these nodes, and it removes the nodes by double clicking. Now, one cool way people like to start off their edits with the tone curve is down here in this drop-down menu. There's actually a couple of preset selections you can use for the tone curve. By default, when you import your pictures, your point curve is going to be set to linear. But watch what happens when you click on medium contrast. You can see it gave the photo a little bit more bite. So what happens when we go from medium contrast to strong contrast? It gave it even more bite. Love it. But it's doing so much more than that, right? Because now that we know how to read the tone curve, we can actually apply what we're seeing happen. So now that we have strong contrast applied in this drop-down menu, we can see that Lightroom added 4 nodes into this tone curve graph. Now from here, we can enhance the effect by bringing down the shadows and the blacks even more, or we could enhance the effect by bringing up the whites and the highlights even more on this right side, so on and so forth. Now let me reset this tone curve again, because the tone curve is also used when folks create what's called a matte finish on their edits. And we can actually demonstrate that with this final edit that I created on this portrait. If we look at this tone curve, you can see that I've done quite a bit here, including a slight matte finish in the blacks and a very, very subtle muting of the whites as well. So let's break down how those effects work. So if I were to more or less undo those effects, I would take this node on the white side all the way to the right and bring it all the way up to the top. And then I would do the same exact thing, but the opposite on this node on the blacks, bring it all the way down. And so you can see those subtle changes create a massive visual effect of difference. So if I put the node back and raise that node on the blacks, you can see we get that matte finish back. And then when we put the node back on the whites, we also mute those whites back down. So let's head back over to our clean exposure and talk about another important aspect to this tone curve. Because in addition to this section here, where we get to effectively isolate different sections of the contrast and we can get off into the weeds and do super ugly stuff on accident, we actually have all that same power with the colors specifically. Now check this out. So if you click on this section here, now we're inside of specific color channels. So this is actually the red channel. And if we go here, this is the green channel. And if we go here, this is the blue channel. And all of the same rules that apply to the regular old point curve, they all apply to these specific color channels as well. So check this out. I can create an S curve in the red channel of the point curve specifically only inside of this color channel. So you can click nodes, you can raise highlights, lower shadows, specifically in the color tones of the reds. So let's undo all of that and let's show you if we click and drag all the way up, you could start to see we're creating all kinds of color shifts straight away in this tone curve. And the same thing is going to happen here if we go to the green channel. You can see greens being exposed in the shadows. And the same thing in the blue channel. You can see all those super cold tones coming in through those shadows. Now, this is all super powerful when you're doing color grading and doing real fine tuning inside of your edits. So let's go back to this edit and take a look here. So you can see each and every one of these channels has been specifically dialed into a very specific color palette. And if we go in and we can move them around, you can start seeing back, whoa, that's crazy. See this tone curve is no joke. You move it just a little bit and you get huge effects. And so let me really show you how powerful the tone curve really is, because you can see this is a final edit here. And we of course started with the base preset Moody 01 high contrast, but you can tell there are so many adjustments here being made. Like, this would have taken me forever to dial in by hand. So we have color grading going on. We have lots of fine tuning going on in the color mixer with the HSL. So almost everything's been adjusted here, but watch this. Okay, if I dial in on the tone curve here and I hover over this eyeball, I can turn off what the tone curve is doing to the edit. So watch, let me turn off the tone curve. Wow, come on. This thing looks super, like this edit is completely flat without all the sauce from the tone curve, right? Turn it back on, hello. Like, that's what we're talking about here with the tone curve, right? So you can tell, you just move these nodes around a little bit, you're making huge changes. So it definitely takes some finesse, right? It takes some practice. It takes a little bit of TLC. Like, you really want to get in the edit and play with it, move those nodes around, see what things are doing. So if you downloaded this raw file and you created something out of this edit, like, I would definitely love to see it. Last week, so many people submitted an edit and I thought that was so cool. I think it's so fun. I hope you guys all enjoy editing some of my pictures. Like, it's so fun. And honestly, keep the questions coming in. The whole reason why I create these videos is to make photography education and resources a lot more approachable, especially for beginners. I've been a professional photographer for almost 10 years now. And when I was first getting started, it was really difficult to find people that like gave me information in a way that kind of like resonated with me, or I would get ghosted or, you know, whatever, right? And so I just want to be a solid resource, especially for beginner photographers, photographers that are into couples photography, wedding photography, branding photography, dark and moody photographers. Come on now. If any of these videos, any of these resources have been helpful for you, please share them. It really helps the channel grow. But anyways, that's enough ranting from me. I need to stay on script. I'm James Young with jamesyoungphotography.com, and I will see you in the next video.
Teach me how to Lightroom, yes indeed. Yes indeed. Perfect balance every need. Every need. Crops align lines that lead. Gallery vibes, art to feed. Grain adding texture, old school style. Frames on fire, photo files. Split tone and shadows. Highlight gold, transform raw. A story told.